I found it wedged between the leather seats of Mrs. Henderson's Rolls-Royce at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, my hands still greasy from detailing the interior. The fabric was cheap, synthetic, definitely not something a 70-year-old widow would wear, and it sure as hell wasn't my wife's size. Maybe it's a new kind of air freshener, I muttered to myself, holding the thing up under the garage's fluorescent light. But the joke fell flat in the empty space, echoing off the concrete walls of Carter Clean's main facility. My name's Owen Carter, and I've been running this mobile detailing business for 8 years. Started with nothing but a beat-up van and a dream of making enough money to buy a house in something better than the post-industrial wasteland that passes for downtown in our corner of the Midwest. The kind of place where the river runs brown from decades of factory runoff, and half the storefronts have for lease signs that haven't been changed since the Clinton administration. But I'd built something here. Carter Clean had 12 employees, a fleet of 6 vans, and contracts with 3 car dealerships. We detailed everything from soccer mom SUVs to executive sedans, and I took pride in the work. Every car that left our care looked better than the day it rolled off the lot. The problem was, lately I'd been noticing things. Little things that didn't add up, like the extra mileage on our company van, the one my wife Maren used for errands and bookkeeping runs. She'd explain it away with trips to the bank or meetings with potential clients, but the numbers never quite matched her stories. 150 miles for a trip across town, 47 miles to visit her mother, who lived 12 minutes away. Then there were the phone calls. Maren had always been social, but now she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. She'd take it to the bathroom, sleep with it under her pillow, and get genuinely angry if I so much as glanced at the screen when a text came in. "You're being paranoid," she'd say, in that tone that suggested I was the problem. "I'm trying to grow this business, Owen. That means networking, that means being available to clients." Maren Carter, 33 years old, had joined the business 3 years after I started it. She was good with numbers, better with people, and had a way of charming clients that I'd never possessed. She handled the booking system, managed payroll, and had convinced me to expand into commercial contracts. The business had doubled in size since she came aboard. She was also beautiful in a way that made other men notice. Blonde hair that she kept perfectly styled even when she was supposedly working in the garage. Green eyes that could shift from warm to calculating in the span of a heartbeat. And a smile that had convinced me to marry her 4 years ago, despite the warnings from my friends. "She's out of your league, man," my buddy Frankie had said the night before the wedding. "Women like that don't settle down with guys like us unless they want something." I'd brushed it off then. Frankie O'Hara owned a dive bar called The Fixer and had been burned by enough women to make him cynical about everything. But now, holding a stranger's underwear in my garage at midnight, his words echoed in my head. The smart thing would have been to confront Maren directly. Ask her about the mileage, the phone calls, the general sense that she was living a life I wasn't part of. But I'd tried that approach before, and it always ended the same way, with me apologizing for being suspicious and her playing the victim so convincingly that I'd end up feeling guilty for weeks. So instead, I made a different choice. The next morning, I drove to Radio Shack and bought a small dashboard camera. Nothing fancy, just a basic model that could record continuously and save footage to an SD card. The kind of thing truckers use to protect themselves from insurance fraud. I installed it in our company van while Maren was at her mother's house. Another one of those mysteriously long visits that somehow required 47 miles of driving. The camera was small enough to hide behind the rearview mirror, virtually invisible unless you knew where to look. "Just covering our bases," I told myself as I connected the power cable. "Insurance purposes." But I knew I was lying. Tyler Brooks had been working for me for 2 years. 28 years old, reliable, and ambitious in a way that reminded me of myself at his age. He'd started as a basic detailer, but had worked his way up to assistant manager, handling client relations and training new employees. I trusted him with keys to the facility, access to the scheduling system, and often left him in charge when I had to handle the business side of things. He was also the kind of guy women noticed, tall, athletic, with the easy confidence that came from never having to doubt yourself. The kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention without trying. I'd seen the way Maren looked at him during staff meetings. Nothing obvious, nothing I could point to and say, "There, that's inappropriate." Just a lingering glance here, a laugh that lasted a beat too long there. The kind of subtle signals that married people learn to recognize in each other. But Tyler was my employee, my friend. I'd been to his apartment for poker games, had recommended him for a loan when he wanted to buy a motorcycle, had even invited him to our wedding. If there was something going on between him and Maren, surely I would have seen more obvious signs. Wouldn't I? The dashboard camera recorded for 3 days before I worked up the courage to review the footage. 3 days of normal business, Maren driving to the bank, stopping at the office supply store, meeting with potential clients at coffee shops around town, nothing suspicious, nothing that couldn't be explained by legitimate business needs. I was starting to feel foolish about the whole thing when I got to Thursday evening's footage. The timestamp showed 6:47 p.m. Maren had told me she was having dinner with her mother to discuss some family financial issues. The van was parked behind a strip mall on the east side of town, in a lot that was mostly empty except for a few cars belonging to employees of the restaurants and shops that stayed open late. At 6:52, Tyler's motorcycle pulled into the frame. I watched him park next to the van, remove his helmet, and look around to make sure no one was watching. Then he walked to the passenger side of the van and got in. For a moment, nothing happened. They were just talking, their faces visible through the windshield. Maren was animated, gesturing with her hands in a way that suggested she was explaining something. Tyler was nodding, occasionally responding with what looked like questions or comments. It looked like a perfectly innocent business meeting. Then Maren reached over and touched his face. The gesture was intimate, unmistakable. Not the casual touch of a boss talking to an employee, but the tender caress of a woman who knew a man's skin, who had touched him before, who had the right to touch him now. Tyler leaned into her hand, then pulled her toward him for a kiss. I stopped the video. My hands were shaking as I reached for the mouse, and I had to try twice before I could click the pause button. The image froze on the screen. My wife and my employee locked in an embrace that left no room for misinterpretation. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, waiting for the rage to hit, waiting for the urge to smash something, to storm out of the house and confront them both, to scream and shout and demand explanations. But the rage didn't come. Instead, I felt something colder, something more calculating. I felt like I was finally seeing clearly for the first time in months. I clicked play and watched the rest of the footage, watched them move to the back seat of the van, watched my marriage end in grainy digital video, recorded by a camera I'd installed to protect my business. When it was over, I ejected the SD card and locked it in the fireproof safe where I kept the business documents. Then I sat down at my computer and opened a new document. At the top of the page, I typed action items. Below that, I began making a list. The first item on my list was simple: change all passwords. I started with the business accounts, the scheduling system, the client database, the payroll software. Maren had access to all of it, which made sense when I thought she was just my wife helping to run our company. But now I realized she was my wife who was sleeping with my assistant manager, and that changed the security equation considerably. I worked through the night, systematically locking her out of every system she'd had access to. Bank accounts, vendor relationships, client contact information, all of it now required passwords that only I knew. I told myself it was just a precaution, a way to protect the business assets while I figured out my next move. But really, I was already planning for war. The second item was separate business and personal finances. Maren's name was on most of our accounts as a co-signer, which had seemed like smart planning when we got married. Now it felt like a liability. I spent the morning on the phone with our bank, our accountant, and our business attorney, setting up new accounts and transferring funds in ways that would protect the company if things got messy. "Is everything all right, Owen?" asked Janet Morrison, our CPA. "This seems like a lot of changes all at once." "Just being proactive," I told her. "You know how it is. Better to have safeguards in place before you need them." She didn't sound entirely convinced, but she processed the paperwork anyway. By lunchtime, I had effective control of Carter Clean's finances, with Maren's access limited to a single checking account with enough money to cover immediate expenses, but not enough to do any real damage. The third item was document everything. I spent the afternoon going through our records, looking for patterns I'd missed before. What I found was worse than I'd expected. The extra mileage on the van wasn't random. It followed a schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months, Maren had driven an extra 30 to 50 miles beyond what her stated activities should have required. The pattern was so consistent that I could predict when she'd been meeting Tyler just by looking at the odometer readings. There were other things, too: expense reports that didn't quite add up, client meetings that had supposedly taken place at times when I could prove the clients were out of town, small discrepancies that individually meant nothing, but together painted a picture of systematic deception. I was printing out bank statements when my phone rang. Maren's name appeared on the screen, along with a photo I'd taken of her laughing at something Tyler had said during a company barbecue 6 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Hey, honey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "How's your day going?" "Busy," she replied, and I could hear traffic in the background. "I'm running late for my meeting with the Peterson account. Can you cover the phones until Darla gets back from lunch?" Darla Williams was our booking coordinator, a 40-something woman who'd been with the company almost as long as I had. She knew every client, every schedule conflict, and every employee's personal drama. If anyone would have noticed something going on between Maren and Tyler, it would be her. "Sure thing," I said. "When do you think you'll be back?" "Not sure. This might run long. Don't wait up if I'm not home by dinner." Another lie. I'd already checked the schedule. There was no Peterson meeting today, which meant she was probably planning another rendezvous with Tyler, and this time I'd be ready for it. "No problem," I said. "Love you." "Love you too," she replied, and hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, wondering how long she'd been lying to me with such casual ease. Then I opened the tracking app I'd installed on our shared business phone plan and watched the little dot that represented Maren's location as it moved across the digital map of our city. She wasn't heading toward any of our known clients. She was driving toward the same strip mall where I'd recorded her meeting Tyler 3 days ago. I grabbed my keys and headed for my truck. The parking lot was busier this time. The dinner rush was starting at the chain restaurants that anchored the strip mall, and there were enough cars around that I could park without being obvious about it. I found a spot with a clear view of where the van was parked and settled in to wait. Tyler arrived first this time, pulling up on his motorcycle at exactly 5:15. He parked in the same spot as before, removed his helmet, and checked his phone. A few minutes later, the company van pulled into the lot. I watched Maren park next to the motorcycle, look around to make sure she wasn't being observed, and get out of the van. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something red and form-fitting that was definitely not appropriate for a business meeting with the Peterson account. Tyler got out of his car and walked over to her. They didn't kiss immediately this time. Instead, they talked for a moment, standing close together in the way that people do when they're sharing secrets. Then Tyler opened the van's sliding side door, and they both got in. I sat in my truck for 45 minutes, watching my marriage continue to disintegrate in the back of a vehicle I'd bought to build our future together. When they finally emerged, Maren's hair was messed up, and Tyler was tucking his shirt back into his jeans. They kissed goodbye, a long, passionate kiss that made it clear this wasn't a new development. This was a relationship. This was love, or at least a convincing imitation of it. I waited until they'd both driven away before I started my truck and headed home. The fourth item on my list was prepare termination paperwork. I'd never fired anyone before, but I knew I needed to do this right. Tyler wasn't just cheating with my wife, he was doing it on company time, using company property while being paid by company funds. That was grounds for immediate termination, but I wanted to make sure I had all my legal bases covered. I called our employment attorney the next morning and explained the situation in general terms. "I have an employee who's been using company vehicles for personal activities that violate our conduct policy," I said. "I have video evidence, but I want to make sure I handle the termination properly." "Do you have a written conduct policy that specifically addresses this kind of behavior?" she asked. I did. I'd insisted on a comprehensive employee handbook when we incorporated the business, partly because it seemed professional and partly because I'd read too many stories about small businesses getting sued over wrongful termination claims. "Yes," I said. Section 4.3 covers misuse of company property, and Section 4.7 covers conduct that reflects poorly on the company. "Then you should be fine, as long as you document everything and follow your established procedures. Do you want me to be present for the termination meeting?" I thought about it. Having a lawyer there would send a message that I was serious, but it might also escalate things in ways I wasn't ready for. I still hadn't decided how to handle the situation with Maren, and I didn't want to tip my hand too early. "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll call you back." But even as I hung up the phone, I knew I wouldn't be calling her back. This was something I needed to handle myself. The fifth item on my list was notify insurance company. This one was tricky. Our commercial vehicle policy had specific clauses about employee conduct and unauthorized use. If the insurance company decided that Tyler's activities constituted a policy violation, it could affect our coverage or our rates. But if I didn't report it and something happened later, it could be even worse. I decided to call our agent and ask hypothetical questions. "Let's say," I told him, "that I discovered an employee was using a company vehicle for personal activities that weren't authorized. What would be the insurance implications?" "Depends on the activities," he said. "If we're talking about stopping for groceries on the way back from a job site, probably no big deal. If we're talking about something that could increase liability exposure, that's a different story." "What if the activities were intimate in nature?" There was a pause. "You mean like private activities in a company vehicle?" "Hypothetically." "Owen, that's a liability nightmare. If someone got hurt, if there was an accident, if another employee claimed it created a hostile work environment, we'd be looking at potential coverage issues across the board. You'd need to report it immediately and document the steps you took to address it. I thanked him and hung up, then added another item to my list. File insurance report after termination. By Friday afternoon, I had everything in place. The passwords were changed, the finances were secured, the documentation was compiled, and the legal groundwork was laid. All I needed now was the right moment to execute the plan. That moment came sooner than I'd expected. I was in the garage, working on a detail job, when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Maren. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I checked the time. It was 4:30 p.m. I opened the tracking app and watched her location. She was at the office, which was normal for this time of day, but I had a feeling that was about to change. Sure enough, at 5 p.m., the little dot started moving. Not toward home, not toward her mother's house, not toward any legitimate business location, toward the strip mall. I smiled for the first time in days. It was time for the 6th item on my list. Confront Tyler, but not the way he was expecting. I didn't go to the strip mall that night. Instead, I went to the Fixer. Frankie O'Hara's bar was exactly what you'd expect from a place owned by an ex-boxer who'd never quite made it out of the neighborhood. Dim lighting, scratched wooden floors, and the kind of clientele that paid in cash and minded their own business. The jukebox was stuck somewhere in the 1980s, and the beer was cheap enough that even unemployed factory workers could afford to drink their troubles away. Frankie was behind the bar when I walked in, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of someone who'd been doing the same job for 20 years. He looked up when I entered, and his expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine concern. "Owen," he said, "you look like hell." "Feel worse," I replied, taking a seat at the bar. "Pour me whatever's strongest." He reached for a bottle of whiskey that didn't have a label I recognized and poured 2 fingers into a rocks glass. "You want to talk about it?" I took a sip and felt the burn all the way down to my stomach. Maren's cheating on me. Frankie didn't look surprised. He just nodded and refilled my glass without being asked. "You sure?" "Got it on video." "Shit." He leaned against the bar, crossing his arms. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to destroy them both." The words came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. Frankie studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "But you need to be smart about it. Don't let anger make you stupid." "I'm not angry," I said, and realized it was true. "I'm disappointed, and I'm done being the nice guy who gets walked on by people who think I'm too stupid to notice what they're doing." Frankie smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Now you're talking. What do you need?" We talked for 2 hours. Frankie had been through his own divorce wars, and he understood the importance of controlling the narrative. "The first person to tell the story gets to decide how it ends," he said. "Make sure that person is you." By the time I left the Fixer, I had a plan that went beyond just firing Tyler and divorcing Maren. I was going to make sure that everyone in our social circle, our business community, and our neighborhood knew exactly what they'd done. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. If I was going to rebuild my life and my business, I needed to control the story from the beginning. The next morning, I put the plan into action. I started with Darla and Tina Rodriguez, our booking coordinators. They were the gossip network of Carter Clean, and if I wanted information to spread quickly through our employee base, they were the people to talk to. "I need you both to know that there are going to be some changes around here," I told them during our Monday morning staff meeting. "I've discovered some conduct issues that I'm going to have to address." Darla raised an eyebrow. "What kind of conduct issues?" "The kind that involve misuse of company property and violation of our employee handbook," I said. "I can't give you details yet, but I want you to know that if anyone approaches you with stories about me being unreasonable or unfair, there's more to the situation than they're telling you." Tina leaned forward. "Is this about Tyler?" I kept my expression neutral. "Why would you ask that?" She exchanged a look with Darla. "We've noticed some things. Late arrivals, long lunches, that kind of stuff. And he's been asking a lot of questions about the scheduling system lately." "What kind of questions?" "Like when you're going to be out of the office, when Maren's going to be handling client meetings alone. We thought maybe he was just trying to be helpful, but it felt weird," Darla finished, "like he was planning something." I filed that information away for later use. "Well, just keep doing your jobs and let me worry about personnel issues. And if anyone asks you about changes in management structure, just tell them to talk to me directly." They nodded, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. By lunchtime, I was sure they'd be speculating about what Tyler had done and whether it involved Maren. I didn't have to spread gossip. I just had to plant seeds and let human nature do the rest. The next step was to isolate Tyler from the information he'd been using to coordinate his meetings with Maren. I changed his access level in our scheduling system, removing his ability to see Maren's calendar or modify appointment times. I also reassigned him to jobs that would keep him busy and away from the office during the times when Maren typically handled administrative work. I'm restructuring some of our client relationships, I told him when he asked about the changes. I need you to focus on the detail work while I handle more of the business development side. He didn't look happy about it, but he couldn't argue without seeming insubordinate. Sure thing, boss. Whatever you need. But I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to figure out if I suspected something and whether he needed to be worried about his job security. He should have been very worried. The third step was to start documenting Tyler's performance issues. I began following up on his work more closely, checking the quality of his detail jobs and timing his completion rates. What I found was that his performance had been declining for months, probably because he'd been distracted by his relationship with Maren. Cars that should have taken 2 hours to detail were taking 3. Client complaints that had been brushed off were actually legitimate quality issues. Scheduling conflicts that I'd attributed to honest mistakes were starting to look more like deliberate manipulation. I documented everything, building a file that would justify his termination even without the video evidence of his affair with Maren. The fourth step was the hardest, acting normal around Maren. She'd noticed the password changes, of course, but I'd explained them as a security upgrade recommended by our IT consultant. She'd accepted that explanation without much pushback, which told me she wasn't planning to do anything immediately suspicious with the business accounts. But she was definitely sensing that something had changed. "You've been quiet lately," she said over dinner on Wednesday night. "Was everything okay with the business?" "Just busy," I replied, cutting into my steak with more force than necessary, trying to stay on top of all the details. "Maybe I can help. I know I've been distracted with some family stuff lately, but I want to make sure I'm pulling my weight." Family stuff. That was a new euphemism for screwing my employee in the back of our work van. "It's fine," I said. "I've got everything under control." She studied my face for a moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to push the issue. Finally, she nodded and went back to her salad. "Okay, but let me know if you need anything." What I needed was for her to stop lying to my face, but that wasn't going to happen until I forced the issue. The fifth step was preparing for the confrontation. I scheduled a meeting with Tyler for Friday afternoon, ostensibly to discuss his recent performance issues. I also arranged for Darla to be in the office as a witness, and I set up a digital recorder on my desk to capture everything that was said. I wasn't planning to ambush him with the video evidence, not yet. I wanted to give him a chance to come clean on his own, to see if he had any integrity left underneath all the betrayal, but I wasn't optimistic. Friday morning, I got a text from Maren. "Meeting with potential new client this afternoon. Might run late?" I checked Tyler's schedule. He was supposed to be detailing a fleet of trucks for one of our commercial accounts, a job that should have kept him busy until at least 6 p.m. But when I called the client to confirm the appointment time, I was told that Tyler had rescheduled for next week due to a family emergency. I smiled and added another note to his performance file. At 3 p.m., I called Tyler into my office. "Have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "We need to talk." He sat down, trying to look casual, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "What's up, boss?" "I've been reviewing your work over the past few months, and I'm seeing some concerning patterns." I opened his file and started reading off the documented performance issues. Late arrivals, extended lunch breaks, quality complaints, scheduling conflicts. His face grew paler with each item on the list. "I can explain all of that," he said when I finished. "I've been dealing with some personal issues lately, but I'm getting it sorted out." "What kind of personal issues?" He hesitated, and I could see him trying to decide how much to reveal. "Relationship stuff. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Another pause. "I'd rather not get into details." I leaned back in my chair and studied his face. This was his chance to come clean, to show some integrity, to prove that he was at least honest about his dishonesty. "Tyler," I said quietly, "is there anything you want to tell me about your relationship with my wife?" The color drained from his face completely. For a moment, I thought he might actually confess, might apologize, might show some remorse for what he'd done. Instead, he straightened up and looked me in the eye. I don't know what you're talking about," he said. That was when I knew that destroying him wasn't just justified. It was necessary. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a printed screenshot from the dashboard camera footage. Tyler and Maren, kissing in the front seat of the company van, the timestamp clearly visible in the corner. I placed it on the desk between us. "You were saying?" Tyler stared at the photograph for a long time without saying anything. I watched the emotions play across his face: shock, fear, anger, and finally resignation. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Long enough." He picked up the photo and examined it more closely, as if he was hoping it might be fake or doctored. When he realized it wasn't, he set it back down and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You're a lot smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. "Apparently. So what happens now?" I opened my desk drawer again and pulled out a termination letter I'd prepared that morning. "Now you're fired, effective immediately, for violation of company policy regarding misuse of company property and conduct unbecoming an employee." He read through the letter, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. "This says I'm not eligible for unemployment benefits. That's correct. Termination for cause. And you're demanding repayment of my advance on next month's salary. Also correct." He looked up at me. "You're really going to screw me over financially because of this?" I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Tyler, you've been sleeping with my wife in the back of my work van for 6 months. You've been lying to me, stealing company time, and violating the trust I placed in you when I promoted you to assistant manager. And now you're sitting in my office acting like I'm the one who's being unreasonable." "It's not like that," he said. "You don't understand what's been going on." "Then explain it to me." He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Maren came to me," he said. "About 8 months ago. She said she was unhappy in her marriage, that you two were having problems, that she was thinking about leaving you." "That's interesting, because she never mentioned any of this to me." "She said you wouldn't listen, that you were too focused on the business to pay attention to what was happening at home." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was furious. Not just because of the affair, but because of the way they were trying to justify it by blaming me. "Go on." "She said she needed someone to talk to, someone who understood the business, who could help her figure out what to do. We started meeting for coffee, just to talk, nothing physical." "When did that change?" "About 6 months ago. She was crying one day, saying she felt trapped and lonely. I was just trying to comfort her, and things happened." "In the back of my van." "It wasn't planned, it just happened." I nodded as if I believed him. "And then it kept happening. She said she was going to leave you, that she just needed time to figure out the financial details to make sure the business wouldn't be damaged by the divorce." "How considerate of her." "Owen, I know how this looks, but I never meant for it to hurt you. I thought you two were already over." I stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I opened my desk drawer one more time and pulled out a stack of additional photographs, screenshots from different days, different meetings, different encounters in the van. "Tyler," I said, spreading the photos across the desk, "do these look like the actions of someone who was planning to leave her husband? Or do they look like the actions of someone who was having a good time screwing around behind his back?" He looked at the photos and didn't answer. "Here's what I think happened," I continued. "I think Maren got bored with our marriage and decided to have some fun with the young, good-looking employee. I think you were flattered by the attention from the boss's wife and didn't think too hard about the consequences. And I think you both assumed I was too stupid to figure it out." I'm not finished." My voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "I think you've been lying to me for 6 months, stealing from me for 6 months, and disrespecting me for 6 months. And now that you're caught, you want me to believe that it was all some kind of misunderstanding motivated by noble intentions." Tyler didn't respond. He was staring at the photographs, and I could see that the reality of his situation was finally sinking in. "So here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to clean out your locker, turn in your keys and your company phone, and leave this property immediately. You're not going to contact any of our clients, you're not going to try to take any business with you, and you're not going to spread any stories about why you were terminated." "And if I don't agree to those terms?" I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then I send copies of these photographs to your landlord, your family, and every detailing business in the city, along with a detailed explanation of why you're no longer employed here. I also file a police report for theft of company property and misuse of company vehicles." His face went pale again. "You can't do that." "Actually, I can. I've already spoken to our attorney about the legal implications of your conduct. Using company property for personal activities without authorization is theft. Having closeness in a company vehicle creates liability exposure that could void our insurance coverage. And violating company policy in ways that could damage our reputation constitutes breach of fiduciary duty." I was bluffing about some of the legal details, but Tyler didn't know that. "I could sue you for wrongful termination," he said. "With what money? And what lawyer is going to take a case where the defendant has video evidence of the plaintiff committing multiple fireable offenses? He stared at me for another long moment, then stood up and walked to the door. You know, he said, turning back to face me, Maren was right about you. What did she say? That you're a cold, calculating bastard who cares more about money than people. I nodded. She's probably right. The difference is, I'm a cold, calculating bastard who doesn't sleep with other people's spouses in the back of work vans. After Tyler left, I sat in my office for a while, staring at the photographs spread across my desk. Part of me felt satisfied. I'd handled the confrontation professionally, documented everything properly, and protected the business from further damage. But another part of me felt empty. Tyler had been my friend, or at least I'd thought he was. We'd worked together, shared drinks together, talked about our plans for the future, and the whole time he'd been betraying me in the most fundamental way possible. I gathered up the photographs and locked them back in my safe, then called Darla into my office. Tyler's no longer with the company, I told her. Effective immediately, her eyes widened. What happened? Violation of company policy. I'll send out an email to the staff later today with the details they need to know. Was it what we talked about earlier? I nodded. Among other things. She shook her head. I knew something was going on. Tina and I both noticed the way he'd been acting lately. What do you mean? Secretive, arrogant, like he thought he was better than the rest of us. She paused. And he'd been asking weird questions about you and Maren, about your marriage, your finances, that kind of thing. That was news to me. What kind of questions? Like whether you two were happy together, whether you were planning to have kids, whether Maren was involved in the day-to-day business decisions or just the bookkeeping. She frowned. At the time, I thought maybe he was just making conversation, but now it sounds like he was gathering intelligence. Yeah, like he was trying to figure out how to position himself if something happened to your marriage. I filed that information away with everything else I'd learned about Tyler's character. It painted a picture of someone who wasn't just having an affair, but who was actively planning to benefit from the destruction of my marriage. That made what I was about to do to him feel even more justified. Darla, I said, I need you to update our client contact list. Remove Tyler from all accounts, and make sure everyone knows that he's no longer authorized to represent the company in any capacity. Already on it, she said. Anything else? Yes. If anyone asks you about why Tyler was terminated, just tell them it was for violation of company policy and refer them to me for details. She nodded and headed for the door, then turned back. Owen, for what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened. Tyler seemed like a good guy, but I guess you never really know people. After she left, I opened my computer and started composing an email to our client list. Nothing dramatic, just a professional notification that Tyler Brooks was no longer employed by Carter Clean, and that any future service needs should be directed to me or one of our other team members. I was about to hit send when my phone rang. Maren's name appeared on the screen. Hi, honey, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Owen, what the hell is going on? Her voice was tight with anger and panic. Tyler just called me. He said you fired him? That's correct. Why? What happened? I leaned back in my chair and smiled. This was the conversation I'd been preparing for. Why don't you come down to the office? I said. We need to talk. Maren arrived at the office 20 minutes later, and I could see the panic in her eyes the moment she walked through the door. She'd tried to compose herself during the drive, but her hands were shaking and her face was flushed. Owen, she said, we need to talk about Tyler. Yes, we do. Have a seat. She sat down in the same chair Tyler had occupied an hour earlier, and I wondered if she could sense the residual tension in the air. Tyler says you fired him for using company property inappropriately, she said. What does that mean? It means I have video evidence of him using our work van for personal activities that violate company policy. I watched her face carefully as I said this, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition. What I saw instead was something that looked like relief. Video evidence of what? She asked. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the same photograph I'd shown Tyler. Maren stared at it for a long moment, and I watched her expression shift from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like admiration. How long have you known? She asked. Long enough to document everything thoroughly. She set the photograph down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, but something closer to curiosity. So what happens now? She asked. That depends on you. What do you mean? I leaned forward and folded my hands on the desk. Maren, we both know this marriage is over. The question is whether we handle this like adults or whether we make it messy and expensive for everyone involved. She was quiet for a moment, studying my face. What are you proposing? A clean divorce. You move out, we divide the assets fairly, and we both move on with our lives. No drama, no fighting, no attempts to damage each other's reputations. And if I don't agree to those terms? I opened my desk drawer again and pulled out a thick folder. Then I file for divorce based on adultery, with video evidence and documentation of your misuse of company property. I also file insurance claims related to the liability exposure you created, and I pursue civil remedies for any financial damage to the business. She opened the folder and started reading through the documents I'd prepared. Bank statements, vehicle logs, insurance policies, employment contracts. Everything she needed to understand that I'd been planning this confrontation for weeks. You've been busy, she said. I've been thorough. She closed the folder and looked at me again. You know, Tyler was right about you. What did he say? That you're smarter than you look, and more ruthless than either of us gave you credit for. I shrugged. I'm a businessman, Maren. I protect my investments. Is that all this marriage was to you? An investment? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I felt something that might have been sadness, but it passed quickly, replaced by the cold calculation that had been driving me for the past week. I thought it was more than that, I said, but apparently I was wrong. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess we both were. We sat in silence for a moment, and I realized that this was probably the most honest conversation we'd had in months, maybe years. So what's the timeline? She asked finally. I've already prepared the divorce paperwork. You can review it with your attorney, but the terms are straightforward. You get half of our personal assets, but no claim to the business. I keep the house, you keep your car, we split the savings accounts. What about alimony? No alimony. You're employed, you're capable of supporting yourself, and the marriage is ending because of your misconduct. She considered this. And Tyler? Tyler is no longer my problem, or yours if you're smart. What do you mean? I pulled out another document from my desk drawer. Tyler signed a non-disclosure agreement when he was hired. He's not allowed to discuss company business, client information, or internal operations with anyone outside the organization. That includes you, now that you're no longer married to the owner. Her eyes widened. You're trying to keep us apart. I'm protecting my business interests. If you want to continue your relationship with Tyler, that's your choice. But you'll be doing it without any access to information about Carter Clean, our clients, or our operations. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to process the full implications of what I was saying. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've had time to plan. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Tyler's motorcycle had been parked that morning. What if I fight this? What if I hire a lawyer and make this as difficult as possible for you? Then you'll lose, and it will cost you a lot of money you don't have. How can you be so sure? I opened my computer and turned the screen toward her. On the display was a video file, the full recording from the dashboard camera showing her and Tyler's encounter in explicit detail. Because I have evidence that will destroy your credibility in any courtroom, and you know it. She watched a few seconds of the video, then turned away. Turn it off. I closed the laptop. Maren, I'm not trying to be cruel here. I'm trying to give you a way out of this situation that preserves some dignity for both of us. Dignity? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've been spying on me for weeks, documenting my every move, planning my destruction. Where's the dignity in that? The dignity is in handling this privately instead of making it a public spectacle. She turned back to face me. And what about Tyler? Are you going to destroy him too? Tyler destroyed himself. I'm just making sure he faces the consequences. He's a good man, Owen. He made a mistake, but he's not a bad person. I felt anger flare in my chest, but I kept my voice level. Maren, Tyler didn't make a mistake. He made a series of calculated decisions over the course of 6 months. He chose to pursue a relationship with his boss's wife. He chose to lie to me every day. He chose to use company property for his personal gratification. Those weren't mistakes. They were choices. You don't understand what our relationship meant to him, to both of us. You're right. I don't understand how two people who claim to care about me could betray me so completely, and then act like they're the victims. We stared at each other across the office, and I realized that this was probably the last real conversation we'd ever have. After today, everything would be filtered through lawyers and legal documents. I need time to think about this, she said finally. You have 24 hours to decide whether you want to handle this amicably or whether you want to make it a fight. And then? And then I file the divorce papers either way. She picked up her purse and headed for the door, then stopped and turned back to me. Owen? Yeah? For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not about Tyler, I'm not sorry about that, but I'm sorry about the way this happened. You deserved better. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. I felt exhausted, but also strangely relieved. The uncertainty was over. The lies were exposed. The pretending was finished. I opened my computer and sent the email to our client list, notifying them of Tyler's departure. Then I called our insurance company and filed a report about the policy violation. Then I called our attorney and asked her to prepare the final divorce documents. By the end of the day, I had systematically dismantled the life that Maren and Tyler had been trying to steal from me, but I wasn't finished yet. The next morning, I got a text from Maren. I'll sign the papers, but I want to talk to you one more time before I move out. I agreed to meet her at the house that evening. When I arrived, I found her packing boxes in the bedroom we'd shared for 4 years. I'm taking the jewelry and some of the furniture, she said without looking up, the pieces that were mine before we got married. That's fine. She continued packing in silence for a few minutes, then stopped and sat down on the edge of the bed. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. When did you stop loving me? The question caught me off guard again. I'd been prepared for anger, for accusations, for attempts at manipulation. I hadn't been prepared for vulnerability. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe when I realized that the person I thought I'd married didn't actually exist. She nodded. Yeah, I guess that's fair. When did you stop loving me? I'm not sure I ever did. Love you, I mean. She looked up at me. I loved the idea of you. The stability, the security, the life we could build together. But I don't think I ever loved you as a person. It should have hurt to hear that, but instead it felt like a relief, like the last piece of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Thank you for being honest, I said. Thank you for letting me leave with some dignity intact. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Maren moved to another city where she got a job with an accounting firm that didn't know about her history with Carter Clean. Tyler found work at a car wash on the other side of town, making about half what I'd been paying him. I heard through the gossip network that their relationship didn't survive the stress of unemployment and public humiliation. Apparently, when the romance of forbidden love gave way to the reality of financial pressure and social isolation, they discovered they didn't have as much in common as they'd thought. I rebuilt Carter Clean with new employees, new policies, and a renewed focus on the kind of quality service that had built the business in the first place. Within 6 months, we'd not only replaced the clients we'd lost during the transition, but we'd grown beyond our previous size. I also started dating again, eventually meeting a woman named Sarah who owned a small restaurant downtown. She was smart, funny, and most importantly, she understood the value of honesty in a relationship. 6 months after that, I was having dinner at the Fixer when Frankie brought up the subject of my revenge. You know, he said, I've seen a lot of guys get screwed over by cheating wives. Most of them either fall apart or do something stupid that lands them in jail. But you handled that situation like a chess master. I just protected my interests, I said. No, you did more than that. You destroyed them completely, and you did it so cleanly that they couldn't even complain about it afterward. He raised his beer in a mock toast. Here's to Owen Carter, the most ruthless nice guy I've ever met. I thought about that conversation as I drove home that night. Frankie was right. I had been ruthless. I'd systematically dismantled 2 people's lives, and I'd done it with the same methodical precision I brought to detailing cars. But I didn't feel guilty about it. Maren and Tyler had made their choices, and I'd simply made sure they faced the consequences. They'd gambled that I was too stupid or too trusting to figure out what they were doing, and they'd lost that bet. The red thong that had started it all was still locked in my safe, along with the video evidence and all the other documentation from their affair. I kept it as a reminder, not of what they'd done to me, but of what I'd learned about myself in the process. I'd learned that I was capable of being cold when necessary. I'd learned that I could plan and execute a complex strategy under pressure. And most importantly, I'd learned that I didn't have to be a victim just because someone else chose to victimize me. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. Personally, I like it detailed, waxed, and left out in the sun for everyone to see.